What about if your job was paint all your pile of shame? If you were brave enough to click on this video, you probably have a question on your mind. What the hell is a pile of shame? Notice that I'm not calling it a pile of opportunity, a pile of pride, a pile of collectibles that I always wanted. No. It is a pile of shame. If you have been in this hobby for long enough, you have a pile of shame. There is no denying that we sometimes buy too many miniatures and there is no realistic amount of time for us to paint them. But what if we actually dedicated enough time to do so? How long will it take for us to paint all the miniatures that we have bought along these years? Having a pile of shame for me is a great source of stress. I get very anxious thinking about how many miniatures I haven't painted and I still want to paint. My collection has grown significantly over the years because I have several armies and I have too many projects in my head. Starting YouTube, it has made it even worse. The more miniatures that I paint for my channel, the more miniatures that I buy, and sometimes I just get miniatures because people want them to be painted in my YouTube channel. This is not a flex, believe me, I get super anxious because I want to paint them all, but it seems that this is a never-ending task. I feel like Sisyphus climbing up the mountain, just carrying with me a big pile of shame instead of a big rock. All these boxes contain several dozens, probably hundreds of painted miniatures. This is part of my collection of Warhammer Fantasy armies. I have High Elves, Skavens, Empire. I have been an avid collector for the longest time ever. So my collection has grown in a way that I don't think I will ever be able to paint it. But what if I had the time and means to do so? What if I dedicated myself to painting my miniatures as if it was a full-time job? Okay, so here's the plan. I am going to develop a system that allows any of us to more or less figure out how long it will take to paint all the miniatures that we have in our pile of shame. The first step is figuring out how long it takes to paint a single miniature. Now I know there are many types of miniatures, but more or less we can figure out a standard time for painting each single miniature that we have in our pile of shame. Of course, there are some things that we have to take into consideration here because not all miniatures are equal and some will take longer than others. It gets a little bit more complicated when we mix different types of miniatures like infantry and cavalry, but I still have a pretty good idea of how long it will take to paint any one of these. Since I dedicate a little bit longer to paint my characters for my armies, well, then we have to add a little bit more time for each one of these. And of course, the more impressive the pieces look, the more time that you have to put into painting them. After that is done, the next step is making inventory of what we have in our pile of shame. This means that we have to figure out how many miniatures we still have to paint and then multiply that by the time that it takes us to paint one single miniature. These two boxes contain a significant amount of my collection. Most of it is unpainted and there are all kinds of miniatures down here. I'm going to bring these boxes with me and we're going to count how many miniatures I have to paint for each army inside of them. This is heavy. I have bought most of my stuff off eBay and second-hand places, which ends up being bargain hunting and sniping for things that I always wanted to own as a child. This ends up with my mailbox flowing with miniatures that I have only painted in my mind. And of course, before even laying the first coat of paint, you have to take into account how long it's going to take to prepare the miniatures for that. In my pile of shame, I have miniatures that have already been primed and they are ready to be painted straight away, but because I like restoring miniatures, many of them have to be stripped down and then built again. Some of them are new resin casts that look fantastic and they don't need much work, and others are miniatures from the 90s that need a lot of super glue, a lot of pitting, and a lot of green stuff before even priming them. And just building all these miniatures is going to take a lot of time. New plastic sets are usually very easy to assemble due to the new technologies with plastic injection. And 3D printed miniatures, if you buy them from the creators themselves, usually come pre-assembled and ready to be painted. On the other hand, no pun intended, second-hand miniatures can actually become very difficult to assemble. Bargains are usually about miniatures that have been poorly assembled or poorly painted, or both. Calculating how much time it's going to take to get all those miniatures ready for the paint jobs, well, that's a whole different can of worms. But I will address this with a simple formula that more or less is gonna give us an estimate time of how long is it gonna take to get those miniatures from our boxes onto the table. And now that we have a more realistic idea of how long it's going to take to prepare and paint our miniatures, I'm going to go into an even more hypothetical premise. You are applying for a new job position. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, 1 hour off for lunch. You have 4 weeks off every year for holidays and 5 days for personal affairs that you end up taking every year. With this schedule in mind, how long will it take you to paint off all your pile of shame? Some quick Google foo will tell you that less than half the time that you spend at your workplace is actually used in doing work. So fetching yourself a hot cup of coffee or tea, browsing the internet, checking out for new paint jobs, or maybe even adding to your pile of shame by browsing online and finding new deals are going to make your paint time take a big hit as well. Let's simplify the whole video in one single minute. First of all, we need to understand how long is it going to take to make our miniatures viable for painting. More or less, this will be the different values. If the miniature is still on the sprue, more or less it will take around this time. If you buy it secondhand and it's already built, well, the time can be anything between no time at all or a few minutes just to put some sand on your miniatures. And of course, if you have to restore or if you want to do some conversions, that is going to take much longer. Restoring miniatures is not something that I recommend if you want to have a manageable pile of shame. This is an average time per miniature, an estimate, so it depends mostly on how you do that. But it's safe to assume that this might take 50 minutes, this could be anything between 0 and 5 minutes, and this can take hours. Next one, let's see about painting. The average time per miniature for painting is slightly different depending on the type of miniatures that we have, and mostly on how you paint them. So if you have speed painting techniques that allow you to save time, your average time per miniature is going to be much lower. But if you are using more elaborate techniques, then the time per miniature is going to go high, very high. On top of that, we have characteristics such as the size of the miniatures, the amount of details that the miniatures have, and in general the complexity of the paint jobs that you're trying to achieve. Certain factions are very easy to paint because of the techniques and approaches that you can try with them, whereas others are not so straightforward and you need to be a little bit more detailed, which adds to the complexity of the paint job. But more or less, this is what we have over here. And then it's just making inventory of all the miniatures that you have in your pile of shame and then contrasting the average time per miniature to build them and the average time per miniature to paint them. You just multiply at the times and then you see how many hours in total is it gonna take to get rid of your pile of shame. Compare that to the time that you will be using to paint your miniatures if you were in a full-time job, and then you're gonna get a realistic amount of time that it will take for you to deal with your pile of shame. And mine is something around this. Bruh. Do you understand my pain? It is plain obvious for me that I'm not going to be able to finish painting my pile of shame. I think I need to start showing some restraint whenever I start a new project and being a little bit more realistic about what I can actually achieve within the time frame that I'm giving myself. What about you? How do you feel about your pile of shame? Do you think you will be able to finish it before croaking? As of me, well, this is the final lesson that I have to tell you. I think I need to start selling some miniatures. Slay that like button to appease the chaos gods, aka the YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to Rush the Wash. Watch this next, and remember that my name is Miguel, this has been Rush the Wash, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Un beso. Adios.